forgot to make this announcement earlier, and I thought about it. I'm like, I better do that before I go any farther. Choir is starting on Wednesday at 6 o'clock here at the church, so if you would like to be a part of that, please come, and we're looking forward to seeing what we're going to be able to do. So at 6 o'clock on Wednesday. Did I repeat myself after? I don't remember now. It's amazing how much I can forget sometimes inside of 20 minutes of a church service. I shouldn't probably say that any place where my district superintendent or bishop can hear that, but so we've been spending some time now going through some of the things that Jesus has been saying in Luke's gospel. And we started the series off telling a story of Jesus at a banquet, and we just had a statement that kind of is going to run through this series that kind of guides that, and started with this statement of let the host lead. The host being Jesus, let him lead. Let him be the one that leads us in all that we do. Now, last week we talked about how, and as we are called to follow his lead, that means that there is going to be something that costs us. Not that Jesus is charging an entry fee into anything, but as we change, as we work through this life and following him, the order of our life will change as he helps us to put things in the right order, and that will have its own cost. Because as anything changes, there's a cost that comes with it. But we have these two things. We're remembering to follow Jesus, to follow his lead, knowing that it is going to cost something as we put our lives into the right order. But after we do that, that is a time for great celebration. That's kind of almost really where we find ourselves today, where Jesus is saying, celebrate with me over all of the things that have happened, because things are good. It's why when, as I was going through this, I actually had to send an email to Crystal and Beth this week saying, I know it's late, but as I'm finishing things up, I need to change the order of the hymns because we need to sing a different one at the end. Because as we come into this, I hear the words in my head of Amazing Grace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. What once was lost, now is found, was blind, but now I see. This is where we are. A celebration today for what has been found. Those are the stories that Jesus is telling our scripture reading. Stories of things that were lost, but they have been found, and the celebrations that come from that. Now, the trouble with those stories is that there are parts of them that we struggle with, trying to figure out. When you start to look at the scholars that go through and they write about this, they do the research, they get really kind of caught up in a part of this because the celebrations are outsized to what has been lost. And so it becomes a struggle to figure out, well, how does this work together? So we have really two questions today that we come with. One, what has been lost in the midst of this? And why are there such big celebrations? Those are the questions we're going to kind of hold on to as we go through this. Now we're going to come at this by way of a really silly joke, which we told when I was in seminary, and I think any profession that you go to school and you end with a terminal degree that changes your title, they all have this somewhere in there, and that is, what do you call a C average seminary student when they graduate? What's that? Reverend, yes, call them reverend. What do you call a B average student when they graduate seminary? Reverend. What do you call an A average student when they graduate seminary? No, professor. If you had an A in seminary, you might be a pastor. You're probably going on somewhere else to work on something else. But I say all that by way of wanting to get to this question. Have you ever stopped to think about how grades are figured? I mean, some of y'all are teachers, so you know what that actually looks like, and some of us, if you've spent as long in school as I have, before I started this last round of seminary for these the last classes that I have, I figured it up. I have something like 100 graduate hours. I have spent a long time in school. I know how grades work. You get to the end of the semester, you count up all of the points that you have, and that determines your grade. If you have, let's say, there are 100 points possible in the class, the letter grade equivalence of that, an A plus is you have all 100 points. Very rarely did I ever have that at the end of a class, and not much past middle school. But 90 points was a B. You had a C at an A was at 90 points, B was at 80 points, a C is at at 70 points. Man, my brain is not working today. C is at 70 points, a D is at 60 points, an E is at 50 points, a F is at 40 points. Someone catch that in there. Yeah, there really isn't a letter grade E. Now, I ran across a story that I thought was just kind of an urban myth about that I expected to see a Snopes article pop up saying this isn't true. There did used to actually be a letter E grade at one point in time. There's a longer story for why that stopped being used that I thought that sounded kind of odd, but it actually is the truth. We skip over E, so we get to F, and makes life a little bit easier. But that's kind of the way we think of grades, right? We do that. Now, those are really just kind of taking the grades that have already been established to give a larger overview of your time. But when we actually go to figure grades on assignments or tests, we start with, like say we have a test or an assignment that's worth 100 points. We get that out, we put that all together, and the assumption begins with that you start with having all 100 points, and as you get things wrong, you start to check things off the list. Your grade starts to go down as you get things wrong, right? That's kind of how, at least that was how most of my grades worked. That's one way of grading that is the most common. That's the way most things are figured. But there's another way of doing that I remember of grading that. I don't remember if I was in high school or I was in college at that point, but they started to change how they scored, how they gave you your score at a music contest. They used to do that. They do this all the time. They don't like to keep things the same for very long. But when they were doing this, they went from the starting. The way it used to be was that you started off at the top score, and then as your performance went on, you got marked down. That was how that worked. That's what folks were familiar with. Somewhere along the way, they decided, well, we want to do this differently. We're going to start everyone off at a middle score, and then as you do better, you'll get a higher score. As you do worse, you get a worse score. If you're just sort of average, well, you know where you're going to land. Now, the high school me and college me says, no, I don't want to go through that score. I like the other one where I had to work at getting a worse score. Several years after that, I'm like, no, that for musical performance is actually, that seems like a better way of handling things. You start at an average and then you figure out where you're going, up or down. Now, there are two things that those grading systems have in common, and that's that they have a scale. You know what to do. You know how much is possible. You know how that's going to work. If so you know where to go with that. But there's another way of grading that I have thankfully never been a part of to my knowledge, and that is that you go to the other side of this. You start with 0 points, and you only get points for the things that you get right. Now, the optimist in me, that's like a very tiny part of me, says, that's great, because that means that the sky is the limit. You can get all of the points. You get enough points, you can get an A+, plus squared, even if you wanted to. Like, you can get a really good grade if you've got enough points in there. I said that's a very small part of me. The realist in me has that pit in the center of my stomach right now that says, I don't want to do that. Because what's missing on that one is scale. Because if there's a scale attached to that, then you immediately revert to something else, because then you know how many points are possible, so you can go, oh, I know how many points I can miss and still get whatever grade that I'm trying to get after. If you're starting with 0 points and you have to earn as you get things correct, and you don't know what the scale is, you don't know if you're working on 10 points, 100 points, 1,000 points, more, and that changes how we prepare for things. If it's on a 10-point scale, we know, that's not bad. We know how that works. I can handle 10 points. Yes, there is lots of opportunity for getting your grade knocked down very quickly, but there's a very limited amount of stuff that can be on there. So I can handle that. That's not a problem. 10 points are easy. At 100 points, that is still manageable, but you start to kind of prioritize your studying and your preparation. You move up to 1,000 points, now life begins to be a little bit different. At 1,000 points, I know that I'm not going to get all 1,000 points. Statistically speaking, it is possible for someone to get all 1,000 points. That's very rare. Most of the rest of us are going, we know we're going to miss points, so we know things we're not going to do well on, so we begin to not just prioritize what we're studying, but we begin to eliminate things that we aren't going to prepare for because we know that we don't have the time or the capability of being able to prepare for that. It changes how we do. But that only works if we know the scale that we're on. If we don't know what that scale is, life is hard. And this is where we find ourselves this morning. Is that scale is unknown. This is in fact where we find, if we go back even farther, this is where we find Adam and Eve. When they were in the garden prior to the time when they sinned for the very first time, they didn't even know that there was a scale out there. They had one job. They had one thing that they were supposed to do. And for the most part, it was so easy to handle that they were in this state of ideal perfection. Very simple, but ideal perfection. They had one job, and for most of the time they did it, and there were no worries until it was a concern. Until they sinned that very first time. All of a sudden, then they get dropped into something that they don't know, that they don't understand. They go from not having any worries to now not even knowing, well, what is the scale? They lost their home, they lost where they lived, they lost this idyllic setting that they were in. Now they were out on their own, and they had all these hardships, and they didn't know what to do. They didn't even know what the scale was that they were being graded on. They just knew that they had to go and live. When Jesus is telling these stories today of things that have been lost, this is where he is getting us down to. Now, there is a way that Jesus taught and that he would preach that was so very dangerous. And it wasn't even because he was really super complicated at this. In fact, it was just the opposite. When Jesus would teach and preach, he did so with an intent of working to be understood by the folks he was teaching. And that was dangerous to a lot of the other folks around, that they reveled in obfuscation. They reveled in making things unnecessarily complicated because that gave them the power. Jesus was being clear, he was being direct, he was being understood. And so when he tells these stories, he's doing so with a purpose. And it's interesting that he tells the ones that he does. We start with the story of the lost sheep. Now, if you are a shepherd, a lost sheep is a common occurrence. I know about this much about sheep. Some of you all know way more than I did because you have been through 4-H as an elementary school kid. I had one summer where I sort of worked with sheep for a little bit. My only lasting memory of sheep is that they are very dumb animals. That seems to be borne out by anyone I've ever talked with that has worked with sheep. They're not the smartest things ever. And so if you are a shepherd, having a lost sheep isn't a special event. That's Tuesday. And it may not even be the first time that Tuesday that has happened. Because that's what your job is to go and to not just watch over the sheep, but go find them when they wander off and bring them back. Likewise, you look at the story of the woman who lost one of her coins. If you start to read about this, you can see folks that they are bending over backwards trying to explain different ways that this coin was so very valuable, trying to get at all of this. And it may have been the first time that this woman had ever lost a coin. It may have been the 100th time that she'd ever lost a coin. But she does what anyone does, and she goes to try and find it. And then she has a celebration. The shepherd had a celebration too, but that didn't make sense. Why is the shepherd celebrating something that happens probably every time that he is on watch? Why is this woman celebrating having lost a coin that represented probably a significant amount of value for her, and she celebrates finding this coin that was lost by throwing a party that's going to cost her part of the coin that she lost? Like there's this weird cycle that sets itself in there. Why the celebration? The things that are lost, Jesus uses intentionally. That he uses them because folks would understand what they mean. And not even because they're hugely culturally important, which he does in many other occasions, but these are just very simple, common things that they would understand because that's what he did. He wanted to make sure that he was going to be understood. So he tells stories of things that are lost, but that can be overcome, that they can be found. where he gets at the depth of what's going on is the celebration that comes. The size of the celebration is the key. For these folks that had lost something, they were now trying to dig themselves out of a hole. They lost something important. They didn't know if they would find it again. They didn't know where it would be. Especially in the case of the woman with the coin, was it all going to be there? How long was it going to take to find anything? When, in the meantime, as for the period of time it was going to take to search and to find, what other things were going to change. If you're a shepherd and if you don't maybe have one or two other folks or don't have anyone else out there and you go off and search for one sheep, you get back, you're going to hope the 99 are still there and then one or two or more of them haven't also wandered off in the meantime. They didn't know any of those things. All they knew was that they had to start stringing along a series of correct answers and hope that at some point someone was going to come up and tell them that they'd passed. They just had to keep working at it and working at it and working at it. And then when they did, when they found what had been lost, they were celebrating as much in joy for as having found what had been lost as in relief because the search now was over. Jesus comes up to us with these stories and he says, celebrate with me. Because in these stories, the one who ultimately does the finding is Jesus. And he is the one who is doing the celebrating and the inviting of others to come and to celebrate. Just as Jesus is our host and he says, come and follow me, let me lead. And he is the one who helps us to put everything in the right order. He is the one who invites us into the celebration because he is the one that knows the depths of what has been lost. He is the one that knows just how far we have to go. We don't know what the scale is that we're working on. Do we have just 10 points to go, 100 points, 1,000 points to go? What is it that we have to do? Why do we need that amazing grace? Because it comes from Jesus. He is the one who knows the score and brings us all up to that passing grade. And not just to a passing grade, but this is the thing that happens on Good Friday and Easter. Jesus comes in and he could just give us grace and life would be good. And what grace does, what Easter does, is it changes the rules of the way that we know the world to work. That's what Easter does. It changes everything. But y'all have worked with people enough to know, especially if you've ever been in a class, no one ever complains if the class after them has it harder than they did, right? But by golly, they're going to complain if the class after them has it easier, aren't they? They don't like that. Folks don't like that. Jesus knew that there was going to be someone who was going to come up as he changes the way that things are done. Someone's going to come up and says, well, that doesn't count. You didn't really do anything. You just changed the way things were going on. And so we have to have the cross on Good Friday, where Jesus comes and he knows the scale that we're all working on. He knows what it is going to take to overcome all of that sin, to overcome what has been lost. And he puts it all up there so that it can be overcome and no one can question it, that he didn't just get us up to passing, but he took us well beyond that. So much so that the points no longer mattered. The scale no longer mattered. All of that no longer matters because then he says to us, now let me show you how we're going to do this from here on out. He both takes care of the old system, the old scale that was weighing us down, then makes it irrelevant and shows us the new way that things are going to work. He says, you have been found. Come, follow me. Let us celebrate this thing and do it differently from here on out. When we look to our own lives and the lives of folks that are around us, we can see the places where we've fallen to, right? We can know the failures and mistakes. We can know the sins. We even know the things about ourselves that no one else knows that we're really good at holding on to. And we can see the worry and the anxiety and the preoccupations that we often have with other things. We can see the holes that we've dug. The ones we've dug for ourselves. The ones that other folks have dug for themselves. We may not know what's inside of them, but we know how that they have dug them. We even can see the holes that someone else has dug, that someone else has fallen into, or the ones we've dug and other people have fallen into. We can see those places. We can see how far down it goes. Jesus says in the midst of this, here is my amazing grace. Let me lift you out of where you are. Come celebrate with me, not just because of the joy that you have been found, but now also the search is over, because here is where you belong. Like we said last week, things will be different because when we are found, then our lives change. And so things won't be the same. But things won't be the same with us now in a place where we belong, celebrating with the one who brought us there. Let us, as we go into this week, let us invite others to come to that celebration. Let us remember and know that we have been found, and Jesus is the one who has done the finding. And let us take that message out to a world that has so many holes that have dug into it, so many places where there are so many that are just trying to figure out what points can they score next because they don't know where to go or what to do or what the scale is. Let us share with them the one who can help them to overcome, and they can be found and come and join in the celebration that Christ has prepared. Let us do all of this in Christ's name. Amen.